For most of my adult life, I believed I was married to a man whose courage defined him. Leo was the person strangers prayed would arrive when their lives were hanging in the balance. A paramedic with steady hands, a calm voice, and a heart that never hesitated to rush toward danger. That's who he told me he was. That's who I fell in love with. And for 15 years I built my life around that image. It wrapped itself around our marriage, around how I saw him, how I saw myself, and even how our daughter Lily saw her world. We met in our 20s, at a dinner hosted by friends who insisted we were meant to get along. I remember walking in with ink-stained hands from a design project I'd been rushing to finish for a client, only to see him sitting with his posture relaxed and his smile warm, even before we were introduced. He told me he worked long shifts with the city's emergency response unit, and he spoke about the human side of the job, holding the hand of an elderly man who feared dying alone, comforting a teenager after an overdose, calming families who needed someone to tell them everything would be okay. It wasn't the adrenaline that drew him in, he said. It was the honor of being trusted. I was captivated. How could I not be? Within 2 years he proposed. We had a small wedding filled with laughter, awkward dancing, and a giant punch bowl that my cousin accidentally spiked too strongly. We honeymooned in a rented cabin near a lake because he couldn't take more than a few days off work. I didn't mind. I was always proud to say, "My husband saves lives." Our rhythms became predictable. My flexible design schedule balanced against his erratic shifts. I handled dinners alone, weekends alone, even holidays alone more often than not. When he rushed out the door with his pager buzzing, I reassured friends that I understood. I genuinely did. How could I begrudge him for doing something so important? Lily grew up thinking her father wore an invisible superhero cape. She would sit on his lap and listen to softened versions of his rescues, imagining him moving through smoke-filled buildings or kneeling beside injured people on the roadside. For her second-grade career day, she had insisted on wearing tiny cargo pants and a toy stethoscope. When she walked into school like that, she held her head higher than I'd ever seen. I loved that. I loved the version of our lives wrapped around the idea of who he was. I should have noticed the first crack, but I didn't. It was subtle, small enough that I brushed it aside. One Tuesday afternoon, he walked through the door hours before his shift was supposed to end. His face looked drained, almost gray. "Rough call?" I asked, sliding my laptop aside. He nodded without meeting my eyes. "Just too much. They told me to head home early." Normally, he would welcome comfort on difficult days. He'd sit beside me, let me make tea, and decompress in quiet. But this time, he retreated to our bedroom, shutting the door behind him like a barricade. Later, when I gently approached the topic, he didn't soften. "Clara, please. You wouldn't understand." The words were a punch to the chest. In 15 years he had never shut me out like that. But I told myself he was overwhelmed. Burnout was real. Trauma was real. I chose patience over suspicion, because that's what wives of first responders did. They supported without question. Then came more signs. Subtle at first. The phone he angled away from me, conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room, schedule changes that conveniently aligned with moments that mattered to us. But each time I tried to quiet the unease rising inside me. After all, I was married to a hero. Heroes carried heavy burdens. Heroes didn't always explain everything. Or so I believed. Until the day life gently tugged at the loose thread, and the world I trusted began to unravel, stitch by quiet stitch. But the second sign wasn't subtle at all. It was the first moment I realized the man I loved might not be who he said he was. And it happened on a weekend I will never forget. The weekend that finally forced me to confront my unease didn't start with anything dramatic. In fact, it began with plans. Simple, sweet, ordinary plans. Lily had just discovered volleyball at school, and Leo had promised her an entire Saturday dedicated to setting up the new net he'd bought. She had already envisioned the whole day. Smoothies at breakfast, assembling the net together, maybe grilling burgers afterward. She talked about it non-stop. And because he'd sworn he had the entire weekend off, I invited 2 families from our neighborhood over for a small backyard cookout. It felt like something we needed. Normalcy, togetherness, a glimpse of the life we were supposed to have. But on Friday night, long after Lily had gone to sleep, I watched Leo's expression shift in the glow of his phone screen. He inhaled sharply, like someone preparing to deliver bad news he knew wouldn't be well received. "You're not going to like this," he said heavily. My stomach dropped before he even spoke the words. Dispatch texted. Kevin broke his leg during their softball game. They want me to cover his weekend shifts. Oh, I have to go in. It wasn't the explanation itself that struck me as strange. It was the rehearsed tone, like someone repeating lines they'd practiced. And as he zipped up a small duffel bag, something felt oddly mismatched. He wasn't wearing his uniform. The bag wasn't his usual work gear. And when he lifted it, it didn't have the familiar clink or weight of his standard equipment. A feeling, cold and unwelcome, pricked the back of my neck. When the door closed behind him, I walked into his closet and stared at the neatly hung row of freshly washed uniforms. Every single one of them was still there, including the one with the grease stain I had noted earlier that week. If he was called into an emergency shift, why wasn't he wearing his uniform? Why was he leaving with a different bag? I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I reasoned. I rationalized. The human mind, when afraid, becomes an expert at comforting itself with lies. The next morning, while cleaning the kitchen island, my phone rang. It was Mark, the firefighter friend we had known for years, someone familiar with the world Leo was supposedly working in. "You three want to come by for dinner?" he asked cheerfully. "Oh, thank you," I said. But Leo had to cover a couple shifts. One of his co-workers, Kevin, got injured. And apparently there was some big pileup. At least that's what he said. There was a long pause. "Clara, I haven't heard anything about a major pileup," Mark said slowly. "And I'm pretty sure I saw Kevin last week. Didn't look injured at all." In that moment my throat tightened, and the world felt strangely muffled, like my ears were underwater. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. But inside something crashed. I hung up quickly. My hands trembled. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. It was the first time someone outside my home suggested that Leo's stories might not line up with reality. All the little inconsistencies I had brushed aside began gathering around me like ghosts. The early return from a rough call. The avoidance. The secrecy. The phone held too close. The uniform that never left the hangar. The shifts that always landed on birthdays, school events, holidays. And now this lie. The kind of lie that didn't just bend truth but shattered it. That night, after I put Lily to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. Fear and denial waged war in my chest. If I looked too closely at the pieces, the entire picture of my marriage might collapse. And that was terrifying. The Leo the first loved, the Leo the first believed in, was built on a story. What if that story wasn't real? I told myself I needed more proof. I told myself I owed him a conversation. I told myself I had misunderstood. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered the truth. This was only the beginning. What happened next wasn't a crack, it was a fracture. And the moment it happened, I knew my life was about to break open in a way I could never undo. If the weekend incident planted doubt, the next event tore that doubt wide open. It didn't explode into my life dramatically. There was no confrontation, no sudden revelation. Instead, truth arrived through something far more fragile. My daughter's hope. Lily had been practicing for her school play for weeks. Our evenings became a routine. Her standing on the living room ottoman practicing lines, me watching with a mixture of pride and amusement. She had the biggest role she'd ever gotten, and she carried the script everywhere like it was a precious secret. And for the first time in a long while, Leo seemed genuinely excited about something that mattered to her. When I reminded him about the date, he didn't hesitate, didn't offer excuses, didn't give me vague promises. "I'll be there," he said. "I mean it, Clara. I'll talk to Marcus about trading shifts. I won't miss this." He even showed me the message he claimed to send. "Can you take my shift on the 17th? Important family event." Marcus supposedly replied with a thumbs up. Lily believed him completely. She clung to that promise like a star she finally caught in her own hands. Days before the performance, she would ask, "Do you think Daddy will get there early? Maybe he'll take pictures from the front row. Do you think he'll bring flowers?" Every time she asked, I felt something tug at the center of my chest. But I reassured her, "Yes, he promised. And your daddy keeps his promises." On the night of the play, I curled her hair, helped her into her costume, and watched her twirl in front of the mirror with radiant anticipation. She looked like a child who believed the world was kind. We arrived at the auditorium early. I saved seats, one for me, one for my mom, and one for Leo, right in the middle, where Lily had begged for him to sit so she could see him easily. At 5:30, the seat was still empty. 5:45, my phone was still silent. By 5:56, the air around me felt electrically tense. The lights dimmed. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to read it. I already knew what would be waiting for me on that screen. But hope has a cruel way of lingering even when logic is long gone. The message was a dramatic masterpiece. Clara, I'm so sorry. There's a massive gas line explosion downtown. It's all hands on deck. I swear I would be there if I could. Tell Lily I love her and to break a leg. I stared at the message until the words blurred. My mother leaned over, whispering, "Sweetheart?" But I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The lie was so blatant it felt like an insult. There was no siren sound in the distance. No flurry of emergency alerts. No news notifications on anyone's phone. Nothing. And then the curtain rose. Lily stepped onto the stage, making a slow sweep of the audience. When her eyes reached the empty seat, her smile flickered. Just for a heartbeat, but it was long enough to break something inside me. Still she stood straight. She delivered her lines. She was brilliant. She was brave. But every time she looked toward the chairs, searching for him, I felt the ground beneath my feet give way. She deserved better than this hollow shell of a father. After the show, she asked in a tiny voice, "Maybe the explosion was really huge, Mom. Maybe Daddy had to help lots of people." I hugged her, feeling her small shoulders shake. "Maybe," I whispered, though I knew the truth in my bones. When she fell asleep that night with her makeup still smudged under her eyes, I made a decision. I carried her to bed, kissed her forehead, and walked straight to the kitchen where my laptop sat waiting like an unopened door. If there had been a gas line explosion, it would be everywhere. Local news, social media, emergency alerts. Searched. Nothing. Not a single mention. The lie wasn't only bold, it was reckless. My pulse hammered in my ears as I reached for my phone. I didn't call Leo. I didn't text him. I dialed the city paramedic administrative line. As it rang, a single clear thought cut through the panic. Whatever I was about to learn would change everything. The woman who answered the phone didn't just give me information. She detonated the truth that shattered my entire marriage. The line clicked, followed by a calm, almost detached voice. "City Paramedic Administration, this is Helen speaking. How can I help you today?" My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't speak at all. It felt surreal, like I was about to cross a threshold and there was no way back once I stepped through. "Hi," I finally managed. "I'm calling to verify some employment information about my husband." "Of course," she said. "What's his full name?" "Leo Carter," I replied, swallowing hard. He's worked with your unit for 15 years. At least." My voice cracked. "That's what he always told me." "All right," she said gently. "Give me just a moment to look that up." I clutched my phone in both hands, pressing it so tightly against my ear that it hurt. Through the line, I heard faint clicking, keystrokes tapping a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. After several seconds, Helen returned, her tone curious now. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm not finding a current employee by that name." The world went still, completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. That's not possible," I whispered. "He left for work yesterday. He's been on shift after shift. Could you check again? Maybe under a different department." "I can check past employee records," she offered. "Sometimes names appear there." More clicking. Then a pause, long enough for dread to take shape. "Here we are," she said slowly. "I do have a record for a Leo Carter." Relief fluttered in my chest, brief, trembling relief that evaporated as she continued. "But it appears he hasn't worked here in over 5 years. His certification was revoked." My hand slipped, and the phone nearly fell from my grip. "Revoked." The word felt foreign in my mouth. "I'm unable to see the confidential details," she added, sounding genuinely sympathetic. "But it shows a permanent revocation. He has not been employed with us since that date. 5 years. 5 years. He'd been waking up in uniform. He'd been leaving home with a duffel bag. He'd been telling stories. Vivid, detailed stories about calls, emergencies, tragedies. All of it fictional." I thanked her somehow and hung up, though I barely remembered doing so. I sat frozen at the kitchen table while the truth crashed over me in merciless waves. I stared at the wall like a person suddenly aware she had been living in a stranger's movie. If he'd lost his job 5 years ago, where had he been going every day? Where were the paychecks coming from? How had he managed to deceive me so thoroughly? Not for days, not for months, but for half a decade. I opened our bank account with numb fingers. The deposits were there, twice a month, labeled as coming from City Payroll Department. But now the label was nothing but a costume, a disguise, forged trail. I clicked on our savings. The balance appeared, and my breath left my body in a single sharp gasp. Our savings, once carefully nurtured, protected, steadily grown, was nearly gone. I scrolled through the history. $10,000 transferred here. $15,000 there. Another transfer. And another. And another. Each one directed to an account under his name alone. An account I had never even heard of. The earliest transfer was dated 5 years ago, almost to the week his certification had been revoked. He had been draining our life in quiet increments. Stealing from our future in the same breath, he was telling Lily bedtime stories. Building a facade of stability while dismantling everything behind the scenes. I moved on to our other financial statements, the ones I rarely examined because I trusted him. God, I trusted him so completely. Buried in the glove compartment of his car was a credit card bill for an account I'd never known existed. Charges piled across its pages. Upscale restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel rooms in our own city. A recurring monthly charge for a storage facility across town. My hands shook as I held the paper. The implications were impossible to ignore. Impossible to soften. Impossible to rationalize. And somehow, horrifyingly, I wasn't surprised. The human heart can sense betrayal long before the mind lets it in. The next morning I drove to the storage facility listed on the bill. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel the entire way. The building was industrial and cold, rows of metal doors stretching into shadows. When I asked the front desk attendant if I could access my husband's unit, he checked the account. "You're not listed," he said apologetically. "Only 2 names have clearance. Leo Carter, and someone named Monica." Monica. A name simple enough to slice through me like a blade. I walked out of that office on unsteady legs, feeling the truth settle like ice under my skin. The lies weren't just professional. They weren't just financial. They were personal, intimate, devastating. And the man I had spent 15 years loving had been living an entirely separate life. But the most damning discovery was still waiting for me. The one hidden in a bag in our own closet. The one that exposed the final piece of his deception. And the days that followed, I moved through my own home like a visitor. Quiet, alert, and unbearably aware of the lies saturating the walls. I couldn't unsee the truth anymore. Every drawer, every closet, every forgotten corner felt suspicious, like it might hold another piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. And I was right. It was the duffel bag. The same one he'd taken on his so-called weekend shift. I hadn't forgotten it. He'd tossed it into the closet afterward, probably assuming I'd never think to check it. One afternoon, while Leo was supposedly at another shift, I sat on the bedroom floor and pulled the bag toward me. My hands hesitated at the zipper for a few seconds. I told myself I was prepared. I told myself nothing could shock me now. I was wrong. Inside wasn't a single item related to paramedic work. No uniform, no gear, no emergency tools. Nothing that belonged to the life he'd pretended to live. Instead I found a neatly folded change of clothes. An unfamiliar tablet with a sleek black case. A folder stuffed with papers, thick enough to strain the seams. The moment I opened that folder, my entire world tilted. Business proposals, loan applications, marketing mock-ups, contracts for office rentals, receipts for high-end equipment, all stamped with company names I'd never heard before. Carter Innovative Solutions, Apex Strategic Group, Pinnacle Ventures. And beside each business registration was a red label. Dissolved. Every one of them. My hands began to tremble with a cold, controlled fury. These weren't small side ventures. They were full-scale attempts at entrepreneurship, like someone trying to reinvent himself as a corporate visionary. But every attempt had failed. Every dollar he had taken from our savings had been funneled into these doomed projects. He wasn't working as a hero. He wasn't working at all. He was gambling with our future. The most chilling part. The pattern began almost exactly when he lost his certification. He didn't want to admit his failure. So he created a fantasy. A fantasy paid for by the life we had built together. As I continued digging, I found more evidence in our home and car. Tidy envelopes of secret bills, hidden credit card statements, documents for a storage unit I now knew he shared with someone named Monica. That name pulsed in my mind like a bruise. It was no longer possible to deny the obvious. The hotel charges, the dinners, the secrecy. All of it pointed toward something I had once believed I could never face. I wasn't just dealing with a failed career or financial betrayal. There was another woman. And he had woven her into the stolen hours, into the lies, into the money, into the parts of his life he had kept deliberately, brutally distant from me. Still, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. Something inside me had gone rigid and sharp. I was operating on instinct, moving like someone who had endured one shock too many to feel anything immediately. Became methodical. I printed every statement. I organized every document. I made digital copies, backups, and folders color-coded by category. Finances, business failures, hidden accounts, personal expenses, storage. It felt like assembling evidence for a trial, but the defendant was the man I had shared a bed with for 15 years. That evening, he came home acting as if nothing in the world was amiss. He smiled, asked what I wanted to do for dinner, kissed my cheek. Pretending. I watched him like a stranger who had broken into my house. Later that night, when he showered, I stood outside the bathroom door and felt the weight of years pressing on my chest. Every sacrifice, every lonely birthday, every cancelled plan, all of it had been for the image of a man who no longer existed. I wasn't married. I was trapped in a performance. A performance he'd been directing for half a decade. After Lily fell asleep, I sat in the dark living room with my arms wrapped around myself. I thought of her, her small face searching for him in the audience, her hurt hidden behind bravery. She deserved the truth. I deserved the truth. And now that I had seen who he really was, I couldn't unsee it. The decision formed inside me gradually, crystallizing until it felt solid and immovable. Leo was going to face everything he'd done. I was done being quiet. I was done being patient. I was done protecting the illusion. The next morning I called a lawyer, and I scheduled the confrontation. But nothing prepared me for the moment he walked through the door and saw the evidence laid out in front of him, because the man who had lied for 5 years didn't just break. He unraveled. I chose a Thursday night for the confrontation, the only night he claimed he wasn't on call. By then, I had already done everything my lawyer advised. Opened a new personal account, made copies of all financial documents, secured what was left of my personal assets, and packed Lily an overnight bag so she could stay at my mother's house. I didn't want her anywhere near what was about to unfold. The house felt unnaturally still as I waited. The blinds were drawn. The evidence, every bank statement, credit card bill, business document, and printout, was arranged in careful rows across the coffee table like pieces of a crime scene. My heart was steady, surprisingly steady. Maybe that was the final stage of betrayal. Not panic, not fury, but clarity. When Leo walked through the door just after 8 p.m., he looked relaxed. Too relaxed. He dropped his keys into the bowl with a familiar clatter and smiled casually. "Hey," he said. "You sounded serious earlier. Everything okay?" He started toward me, leaning in as if to kiss me, but I stepped back. And that one simple movement froze him in place. "Where's Lily?" he asked, confusion creeping into his tone. "She's staying with my mother tonight," I said quietly. Something flickered behind his eyes. Tension. Real tension. He looked at the table, finally noticing the papers laid out like an accusation. "What's all this?" he whispered. "A timeline," I said. "Of the last 5 years." He blinked. "Clara, what are you?" "Don't," I interrupted, pointing to the closest document. "Start there." He stepped forward and lifted the first page. A bank statement showing the earliest large withdrawal, taken 3 days after his paramedic certification had been revoked. "I called your department," I said, watching his face drain of color. "You haven't worked there in 5 years." Silence. The kind that feels like a vacuum. He opened his mouth, closed it. A stutter of breath escaped him. I didn't give him a chance to speak. "You told me you were on shifts, that you were saving lives, that you were exhausted from work." My voice hardened. "But you were draining our savings to fund fantasies. Fake companies, failed ventures, loans, equipment we never needed." "Clara," I picked up another sheet. "And this." Hotel rooms. Restaurant bills. I held it out toward him. Storage unit rentals. He flinched. And the access list. My voice dropped to a blade's edge. It only had 2 names, yours and Monica's. That name shattered whatever was left of his composure. He dropped onto the arm of the sofa like his legs wouldn't hold him. His hands clamped to his head. I was ashamed, he choked out. I messed up a call. Froze. They took my certification and I didn't know how to tell you. You always saw me as someone strong. Someone good. So you lied, I said. For 5 years. I thought I could fix it, he babbled, tears spilling. I thought I'd make back the money, rebuild everything, and then I'd tell you once things were good again. I didn't want you to think I was a failure. I didn't want Lily to think. You let your daughter stand on a stage looking for you. I cut in sharply, and you lied to her with a made-up disaster you thought sounded heroic. You broke her heart. He sobbed harder, shaking his head, mumbling apologies that felt like soot, black and insubstantial. And the cheating? I asked, voice steady even as my insides twisted. Was that supposed to fix something too? His shoulders collapsed inward. It was stupid. I was lonely. She believed in the business ideas. She made me feel like I wasn't a failure. I stared at him, the shell of a man who had worn my husband's face while hollowing out our lives from the inside. For 15 years, I said quietly. I trusted you. I loved you. I defended you. And for 5 of those years, you watched me live a lie you built. He reached for me, hands trembling, desperate. Clara, please. Don't do this. Don't give up on us. We can fix this. I'll get help. We'll get counseling. I stepped back again. It's already done, I said, voice calm and final. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. I want you out of this house now. His expression cracked. He tried to speak, but no sound came. He packed in silence. And when he walked out the door an hour later, the click behind him sounded like a lock sliding into place for the final time. The days that followed were brutal, but honest. Lily cried, asked questions I wasn't prepared for, and I held her through each one. The financial recovery was daunting. The emotional fallout even more so. But the air in my home changed. It was lighter, cleaner, true. I no longer lived inside someone else's lie. Today I am rebuilding, slowly, steadily, piece by piece. My foundation is no longer a story I was told, but a truth I chose. Lily is healing. I am healing. And for the first time in years I feel something like safety. Not because someone saved me, but because I finally saved myself.